Good morning, PV. It's good to see you. Great to have you who are following online. Welcome. Excited and that you're all here. We started a new series this week called The Grudge. This morning, I'm going to be talking about the whole thing about the grudge is you and I both know, all of us, we know that it's easy to carry a grudge, isn't it? Let's be honest. If we look at it, it's pretty easy to carry a grudge. I was, years ago, remember, as very young, I loved my grandparents. Don't ever get me that I'm saying anything bad, but my grandma McWilliams had a sort of a side reputation. And it was said that you don't want to ever get on her bad side. She did not have a good forgetter. All right? And it wasn't until I was older that I really understood that, what that meant. And that's not a positive way to be. Okay? We're going to talk basically the next 4 weeks about forgiveness. Because we can talk about it, we can look at it, and we can say things and nod about it, but boy, is it a lot harder to do it. To let it go. I want to give you a little idea of what's coming up in the weeks ahead. We're going to talk about faith to forgive. In other words, next week we're going to talk about what happens when you have major things, big betrayal. A husband or a wife just walks out. Somebody you trusted, your kids turn on you. A big betrayal. How do we have the faith to forgive that? When something really big happens, how do we forgive them? Then we're going to talk the following week after that about, I hear people say it all the time, I got to learn to forgive God. And we're going to talk about that because it's not good theology. But we're going to talk about it. All right? Actually, Brother Tom was just here. He's going to talk about it. All right? I'm going to be away for a couple of days again, helping my sister-in-law up north mowing and taking care of some things around her place. And so Tom's going to talk about that. Then we're going to talk about letting go of our grudges against God. You know, how we can, and we're going to look at forgiving ourselves. I hear people, I got to learn to forgive myself. And to a point, that's also bad theology. We're going to talk why. We're going to talk that once we're forgiven by Christ, no more forgiveness is required. We just got to let it go. You just got to let it go. You can't hang on to guilt. You can't put this ball and chain around you. And people say, well, I got to learn to forgive myself. No, you have to accept the forgiveness of Christ. So we're going to talk about that in detail, okay? So some of you, if you're struggling with that and say, I think it's really, I need to forgive me. We'll talk about it. We'll get there. Today, I'm sort of going to ease into the whole subject. If you look at your notes, you're going to say, wow, he's not giving us like 3 or 5 points or anything like that. No, we're going to talk about this whole thing as we ease into it. I want to start with a really strong foundation. And to do that, we have to sort of understand how we develop this whole mindset of a grudge. And most of the time, a lot of our grudges start with very small, little offenses. And I think that we would be very honest today to say that it doesn't take much to offend people today. Does it? Doesn't take much. We get upset so easily about things. And it doesn't matter what. If you are looking to be offended, this is the time to be alive. This is it. Because you will be offended by everything that goes on. I mean, I grew up with All in the Family, the Jeffersons, Blazing Saddles, things like that broke every kind of rule. And what did we do at that time? We laughed. I didn't think anything racial or things about it. We'd laugh and say, boy, they're idiots. But we laughed about it. It's like we didn't get all, and you say, well, we should have. And I know some people out there probably, and maybe here, are saying, well, we should have. But I'm just saying it's like we get offended about things so easy. And what we do, we take those little offenses. They may be little. And, I hear this with children. A lot of my grandchildren, they'll build up little offenses from a brother or sister. And they did this and do that. And finally, when it explodes, they can run the whole list. Adults aren't the only one. They learn this early of things because, they never dealt with it. They held on to it. And that's what we do with the small little offenses. These aren't big things. These aren't big things. They're just, a lot of times, people don't even know that they did it, that you're offended by something. You know what I mean? It's like, I've had that happen quite a few times and over the years in ministry, and they'll say, you really offended me with what you said. So I say, what? And when they tell me, it's like, huh? Because it wasn't understood completely wrong or whatever, and you offended somebody. So we're going to look at that. We're going to look at these small offenses. How many of us would at least admit that we can be subject to that something can really sort of offend us? It's most of us. Let's be honest. It's most of us. We all deal with it. Some people, like I said, today we're offended by almost everything. And it's easy to be offended by small things. You may find yourself actually tripping over a lot of small offenses. Some of you, somebody rolls their eyes. I don't know if you have an eye roller. You know what I mean? It's sort of like you tell them something, they roll their eyes, like, oh, yeah. Some of you are eye rollers. I see it. I see you. And others, and I want you to know, I'm not offended by that. So you roll your eyes. But some people are offended by that. Someone forgets to say, hey, you did a really good job, and we're bothered by that. I mean, there are those of us, we like a pat on the back. And if we don't get a pat on the back, we're offended. Well, why didn't I? I think today social media makes it really easy because we put something out on Facebook or Twitter or whatever we use, and then we quickly watch. Is somebody responding? And if they don't respond, why didn't my friends respond? And then we get offended because our friends didn't respond, but they responded to somebody else, but they didn't respond to us. And then we can go, right? We go like that. And we begin to think the worst. Do we ever think the best? You know what I mean? It's like we really have a tendency to lean to, why didn't they? As I said today, if you are on a search to be offended, for you to be offended, this is your time. You'll always find what you're looking for. You always will. But you know what? Out of all of life, I have never heard someone who develops a grudge, and then you know what a grudge turns into? Bitterness. It really does. Unforgiveness turns into bitterness. Bitterness is a poison. And I've never in my life heard somebody who is bitter say, I love being bitter. I'm better bitter. Did you ever hear anybody say that? I never did. I never heard anybody claim that. I never heard anybody say my marriage is stronger because I carry a grudge. That's never been the case, not in all my dealings with people. My relations with God are richer because I'm mad at Him. Didn't hear that, have you? I'm making more of a difference in this world because I have a tower of accumulated offenses where everybody gets under my skin, and I am better for it. I am a happy person. Right? Don't hear that. None of us. There has never been a win in living offended. And can I be really honest with you about something? Life's way too short. And our calling, if you're a Christian, our calling from God is far too important for you and I to be offended by every little issue that comes along. Everyone. We just got to stop. Our life's passing by. My brain has not caught up with my age. I don't know about yours. My brain has not caught up with my age. I want to tell you something. I think at times I'm still about mid-20s. Mid-20s. We helped my youngest son move yesterday, and my body is in its 90s. All right? If you say, boy, you're not moving much today, I'm telling you now. Why? It hurts. But life is too short, and our calling is too great for us to constantly be offended, distracted by offenses. You know, that's what they do. They distract us. Proverbs 19, verse 11. We're going to revisit this verse, but I love it. It goes right with what we're saying now. It says, a person's wisdom yields patience. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. It's to our glory. Why do we get hung up on it so much? When will we ever be able to say, I'm over that? As soon as it happens, I'm over it. That's nothing. I'm not going to worry about it. Well, how do we as Christians, how do we as followers of Jesus get over the grudge? How do we grow past those daily temptations that we get easily offended by? I got one big answer. One big one. The answer is you need to close the gap with love. You say, wait, what gap? Well, that's the answer. Close the gap with love. Oh, I didn't tell you what gap, did I? Proverbs 10:12 says, hatred stirs up strife, but love covers all offenses. We close the gap with love. Now I'm going to tell you what gap. There is a dynamic that basically happens in every interaction that we have with other people. It is a scientific interaction, dynamic, and someone says something to you, normal talking, and you respond. Between what they say and your response is a gap. Can be very, very small. You with me? You understand? Can be very, very small. But the gap I'm talking about, it can be longer too, is when somebody says something, you immediately have to respond or say something, and sometimes we have to think about it, and there's a little bit of a gap. It may be microsecond, it may be 3 seconds, but there's a gap. And this is very important. You get to choose what you put in that gap. You get to choose your response. What's it going to be? Do you understand that? That's important to understand what I'm talking about. That dynamic is essential to understand. It happens all the time. Somebody says something. You have to think about what they say. It's the gap, your response. Those are important. We choose what gets put in the gap. Proverbs says what we should put in the gap. Love. Love response. Love overcomes. Love overlooks. Right? If you don't believe me, read what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 13. Read that entire chapter. It's all about that. There's always a gap. There is always some kind of action, and we get to choose what's in that gap. Let me give you an example. I'm going down the road, and a guy gives me the middle finger, flips me off. There's a gap. There's a gap. I immediately think, who was that? Why did he do that? What did I do? All this is processing in the gap. How do I respond? I could go road rage, right? I could return the signal. I can picture Jesus doing that, can't you? No. Let me answer that very quickly so you don't think it goes out to Jesus, that Jay says Jesus, flips people off. No. You see what I'm saying? I'm bringing this idea out. We have moments to respond. And what we put in that gap really is important. And the thing of it is, what we have to do is in that moment, we have to try to determine and interpret. We have to become an interpreter of what they meant. And I know somebody's sitting back there thinking, well, if he flipped you off, he probably meant not always. You say, not always? Yeah, I had guys that would do that to me. That was their signal all the time. They might have meant it, but I got used to it. And it didn't mean anything. I didn't even think or respond to their stupidity, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not supposed to use stupid. I keep forgetting that. My grandkids, they're not here today. It's that kind of thing. We have to interpret. What did you mean by it? And can I tell you something? Can I just share something about us? We are absolutely horrible interpreters. We are. We always think the worst. But you don't think that way about you. You don't. Let me give you an example. Moms, you have little ones. And every week you have to go to the dreaded grocery store with your little one. Moms, you know what I'm talking about, don't you? Because why? You think everybody's looking at me. What kind of parent will I be? When at the grocery store, they set you up with all the candy, hand-reachable things right at the checkout counter, and when they reach and get one and they don't get one, that child knows, I will make you pay. I will make you pay. And you are trying your best to discipline, correct, not give in, right? And it's like, you realize, they didn't have a good nap. They didn't have a good night. They're not feeling well. There's all kinds of reasons for that to happen, right? Right? We can say that. What we do is we look at the circumstances around us, but when we see it on somebody else, we say, well, what kind of parents are they? Don't we? I mean, we see it, we say, well, they're lazy. They must be one of them liberal left-wing parents. The kids are, having just meltdown, let them go. Don't we think that? Do we ever think, man, they're having maybe a bad nap, maybe this. Man, I pray that mom gets strong. We have a tendency to think, what we do is we look at the circumstances around what we do, but we interpret somebody else's character. Okay? It's their character. There's nothing worse, all right, for some of us, there's nothing worse to go into a restaurant and your waiter's having a bad day. Because they're going to take it out on you. They're not doing very good. And we can't wait to get home and write a really nice review on Facebook without ever wondering what happened in their life. Maybe they just learned that their wife or their husband walked off. Maybe somebody in their family got a diagnosis of cancer or some other very severe illness. We have no idea, but we make the assumption in our interpretation, in the gap, that it's their character. It's their character. And we don't just do it in a restaurant, in a grocery store. We do it everywhere. We do it in church. When something happens, when somebody doesn't go right, when we think, oh, I need to let them know this or that, we go after the character. But if it was us, it's, oh, you don't understand the circumstance. I was never, or we say something and, I would never say that. Don't you know who I am? You took the wrong meaning. Who are you to take that kind of meaning? You have character issues. No, it might be just the perspective. That's what somebody heard that morning. You know what I mean? It's that simple. But what we do is we go in that gap and we don't even think about the possibility of what's going on in their life, what issues they're having with, what they're dealing with. We assassinate the character. Our response is anything but loving. Anything but loving. And that's where we have to deal with it. We have to look, it's human nature, and we have to overcome that human nature. That if you want grace, if you want people to look at you when your child melts down because they really haven't slept well, because they are tired, because they're just being a brat. All right? And that's coming from a child that knew how to be a brat. We can do that. And it doesn't really reflect anything with parenting. If we can't begin to realize that somebody where they are, you know, as your pastor, and this isn't in a defense, but it just made me think of it. So I have to say it's from God this morning, all right? It's a kind of thing where there'll be times I might quote or quote something and give you the wrong verse. Okay? I want you to know something. It will happen again and again. Why? Because I'm your pastor. Okay? I mess up. I can look down, get it right here till it comes out my mouth. It's somewhere else. It's human. And I think that there's that point where I love correction. Please don't take it wrong. But in the whole of life, you don't have to correct everybody. We make mistakes sometimes. Really not a big deal, is it? It's not a big deal. Why do we make it a big deal? Why do we get upset? Why do we have to write a bad review? Maybe you do after you've been in there 10 times and you had the same waiter that needs an attitude adjustment. But how do you do it? How can I do it? What can I do to help him? You know, we are followers of Jesus Christ, and the world isn't beating a pathway to our door because Jesus said the way the world will know you is what? How you love one another. That isn't just Christians. I mean, let's be honest. We Christians, we have trouble with each other. There's a lot of people, and I'm sure some people wonder about me, how can God love you? He does, but how? All right? And it's that kind of thing. It's like we need to love. And we think that if I love somebody, it excuses them. It gives them a right. It allows them to walk on you. That's not what Jesus did. People didn't walk all over Jesus, but he loved them. He loved them. And there's a huge difference in the way we look at things. We have to quit looking at others when somebody offends us. You know, they can give us a quick sort of brush off. I know a lot of people get real worked up. Well, I just paid my bill and that was, how can you be so rude? Maybe they're really in a hurry. Maybe you just haven't seen that long line behind them. And things like that, you know. And I see that all the time. I can be at market. We have a whole lot of people out. I got to tell you, I don't really care who came first. You should know that. But people depend on me to pick, or if we're behind the counter, to pick the right one. I don't see everybody coming in and say, oh, the best way would be take a number, I guess. That would solve that issue. But you know what I'm saying? It's like be decent to one another. What do we expect from people? What do we expect? We expect the very best. What do we give people all the time? Do we? Do we do that? Aren't we short with people sometimes? Wives, husbands. Aren't we short with each other sometimes? One of the hardest things for me on doing text or email is I am short. If you get a message from me, it is often yes, no. And I have people say, that's all you said. Are you upset? I gave you an answer. I do this phone thing, but I don't like it a lot. I'm not going to hold a 4-page conversation on it. I'm not going to do it. I can be brief. Brief does not mean I'm being rude. You know what it means? I'm being brief. I've answered the question. I haven't asked how you are you smiling, or anything else. Doesn't mean I'm mad at you. I love you. You ask me, is the church open or closed? Yes, no. That kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? Those kind of questions. And what I'm doing, I'm applying it to me, but I'm not trying. It's all of us. All of us. We take our situation, and it's always, well, what's the reason? I was really stressed out that day. That's why I jumped all over you. But nobody else knows that. They think you're a jerk. Right? And you think, oh, it's a wrong interpretation. But we do the same thing. We turn around and do the same thing constantly to people instead of responding in love. There's always a gap, and you and I get to choose what we put in the gap. I can tell you what Satan wants us to put in the gap. Satan in Revelation 12:10, for the accuser of the brothers have been cast down. He accuses them before God day and night. We're told that Satan right now goes before God, and he accuses you, he accuses me of all our failures, of character assassinations, all right? All day, all night, telling God they're no good. And he tells you that. God doesn't love you. God doesn't want you. You can't win. You're a loser. You constantly sin. You did this. How can God ever forgive you? He's the accuser. So Satan wants you to take that gap and always assume the worst about everybody else. So listen, followers of Jesus, what we do when we have that moment, to consider, instead of getting offended, instead of all the hairs on our neck and our feathers getting all ruffled, we have that moment to be Jesus Christ, to respond in love, to respond lovingly. Like we would want somebody to have, when we're having that kind of day, to respond to us. And what a difference it would make. What a difference that would make. God wants us to fill the gap with love. Proverbs 17:9, whoever would foster love covers an offense. That's what we're talking about, being offended. Whoever would foster love covers an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. When we spread it, when we tell people, he's such a jerk, he's so arrogant, she thinks she's better than anybody else, we spread division. We cause issues. It's not loving. It's not right. When somebody does something to us, Satan wants us to respond with accusations. She thinks she's better than anybody else. He thinks he's too good for me. Love doesn't do that. That's not what love does. See, love assumes the best. You know a prime example of this? Remember, Jesus chose his disciples, right? Chose his disciples. Do you know the one disciple that everybody hated? They didn't want Jesus to pick was Matthew, the tax collector. They hated him. Jesus chose Matthew. And everything in Jesus, as a Jew, should have been offended by Matthew. But Jesus chose love. Matthew turned into an amazing disciple. And the details of his book, the Gospel of Matthew, is amazing. And that's what God did, even though everybody else is saying, he's a traitor. He has forsaken his people. You know, he is sold out to the government. All these things that were offenses to the people. Jesus chose love. Chose love. And that's what God wants us to choose. To think the best of someone. Paul says in Ephesians 4:2, be patient with each other. Apparently in Bible times, people were impatient. They didn't live when we do. We're really patient people, aren't we? We have all this stuff that makes things so fast, and microwave ovens. I mean, they were getting patient when they had to wait 4 hours for dinner, right? No, we struggle with that. Be patient with each other, making allowance for each other's faults. Faults. Brothers and sisters, do you hear that? He is writing to us, and he's telling us as saved people, you and I have faults. Can you believe that? That's hard to believe, isn't it? I feel somewhat offended by Paul's little terms there. No, I don't. That's a lie. I don't feel offended by that at all. It's absolutely true. We are loaded with faults. Be patient with each other. So many people in the family of God, they think a church is perfect. You ought to be able to do this. You ought to be able to do that. No, we're family. And I don't know about y'all families, but the McWilliams family, we argue. We can disagree with each other. We can get a little up. Actually, we get mad at each other. Let's just call it what it is, if we're being. But love wins. Love wins. In a church, we will disagree. We will not always see eye to eye. We will not always be doctrinally at the same place. Love needs to win. Grace reigns supreme here. It's all about grace. Church, what do we put in the gap? What are we filling in the gap? You have to realize something. Someone's behavior may not be at all about you. Someone's behavior, we make everything about us, but it's not about us. It may not be about us at all. Why would someone be harsh? Why would somebody, you know what? Hurt people hurt people. So why are they hurting people? What's going on in their life? What is it? Sometimes a hand on somebody's hand said, how can I pray for you? What's going on? They may go away, but it's an act of love. It's an act of love because I care. Something's going on. It's not me. It's not about me. What's going on? And then we begin to make allowances. That's why we fill the gap with love. We give people grace. We make allowances in the same grace that I want from God. If I was to look at my life and be honest, if I don't have the grace of God, I'm in bad trouble. Even as a follower of Jesus Christ. All right? I'm not worried about it because I have the grace. I have grace. We get to choose what's in the gap. I want you to think about something. Think if Jesus would get offended. Think of all the things that people did. He could have said to Matthew, hey, Matthew, you didn't even comment. You know, I healed a blind man today. And you didn't even say, hey, that's amazing. That's great. I said, you know, Matthew, that worked me up so bad. I'm so offended by that. I can't heal anybody the rest of the day. Thomas, why do you doubt everything I do? Why do you just doubt it? What do I got to do? Raise people from the dead? What is it, you know? What if Jesus went around and said that all the time? Oh, my word, guys, that Pharisee really upset me. Did you see the way he just scoured at me? He didn't say nothing. He just looked mad at me all the time. I can't go on here right now. We got to leave. I can't do this anymore. Aren't you glad that wasn't Jesus? Aren't you glad that Jesus didn't get offended by anything? He handled it with love. He handled it with love. His response was love. Even when he was very direct with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the religious leaders, he was very hard on them, but he did it lovingly. Proverbs 9:11 again says, "It's a person's wisdom to yield patience." If a person's wisdom yields patience, and it is one's glory to overlook an offense. That word, to overlook an offense, means it's a decision, a conscious decision to overlook it. I'm not going to let it go. And here's what we got to do. I'm going to tell you what we got to do. You can't come back to it 3 weeks later and say, I'm going to forget it. I'm going to forgive it. No. See, small offenses, you deal with it right away. What we call real time. In real time, when it happens, deal with it. I'm over it. Done. Not going to be an offense. I'm not going to let it go. I'm going to let it go. Doesn't matter. I'm going to let it go. You were mean to me? Okay, I'll get over it. I'm going to let it go. It's nothing. I'm going to forgive it. I'm over it. Somebody doesn't invite me to a party, really close friend, but I didn't get invited to a party. That's okay. I'm not going to sit and worry about it. I'm not going to lick my wounds. I'm not going to add it to the list of offenses that you did to me. I'm going to let it go. I could have been overlooked. It may be a small party, the closer, family type thing. I'm going to let it go. I'm going to think the best. I'm going to start to look at people and think the best. I'm going to show love. I'm going to choose to show love. I know for me, as a pastor, my life is way too short, and my calling from God is way too important to ever let it be slowed down by people's offenses. Because, alone, if you think of the gospel, Jesus said, I will be an offense to the world. Everything I preach is an offense to somebody. But I always need to preach it out of love, not out of judgment, not out of condemnation. Jesus didn't condemn, neither will I. It's a big thing. And I do feel that God's called me to something that's just too important to let other things get in the way of it. Let other people or things or offenses pull me down. It's too important a calling all of us have. If you're a Christian, you have a calling on your life, and it's too important to get bitter and hung up and hateful and mean when God has called you to something far greater than any offense that we have. I think we have to look at a whole scope. Politically, I might be one way, you might be another. I want you to know something. I am perfectly okay with that. I may not agree with you. I may have biblical doctrine that says you are whatever. But I am perfectly okay with that. If we can't have a discussion and talk about it without getting hung up or saying you're an idiot or something like that, then I wonder if we have the love of Christ in us, that politics and things haven't become so important. I love to debate. I don't care what it is. If you want to debate chocolate chip cookies, I'll debate it because I like them a certain way, and I'm going to defend that way, okay? But I'm going to listen to you. I'm going to listen. It's that kind of thing. We've lost the civility to think the best of other people, to think and love. And I know it's hard. I know it is. Because we are so strong when the country's nuts today and everything else, but at some point, let it be the followers of Jesus Christ who bring back civility into the civic question, the civil realm of thinking the best of someone. We get angry. We get angry. And it's not okay. It's not. There's so many things. Think about it. We get worked up over, to me, when I think about it on a certain level, it's absolutely stupidity. But we argue and get mad because somebody likes a Chevy or a Ford or a Dodge. I know people who basically families have almost split because a Ford family, somebody bought a Dodge because it was cheaper. And it's like, I'm going to disown you, take you out my will. Something's wrong with us. Something seriously is wrong with us, and it's sin. You are a pawn of Satan. When you no longer, as a Christian, can say and put in that gap, I love you. I love you. Because Jesus Christ died for the Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian. He died for a communist. He died for a dictator's realm or whatever. I'm not defending them. I'm telling you that Jesus loves them. Love doesn't stop. And somewhere within us, we must create the attitude of forgiveness. Forgiveness. Not thought about, done later, but forgiving. Now, done. I think that God's helped me through a lot of that, because I'll have people come up and say, you know, you really offended me, and I don't even know what we're talking about. Or they'll say, I'm sorry, but I didn't mean to offend you. I don't know what you're even talking about. And that's being honest. Because done and gone. Done and gone. It's the way it is. And when we learn to forgive like Jesus, and we take, somebody gives us some thing, and we have to respond, there's this gap. And with the help of Jesus Christ, I will fill that gap with love. And Satan and his accusations and what he wants me to do can go back to hell. He's not going to plant it in my life. Would you pray with me? Heavenly Father, as we come to you this morning, I want to thank you for this opportunity to look at forgiveness. The reason I'm so thankful for it is because there's no one who forgives like you. No one. We as a people, we don't deserve forgiveness. But you love us so much that you sent Jesus Christ to die for my sins. While he hung on a cross that we nailed him to, we spit on him, cursed on it, at him, treated him with hate and rejection. He looked to you and said, forgive them. Forgive them. You took a thief who was going to die right beside you and said, today you'll be with me in paradise. He's forgiven. Our Heavenly Father, if I can ask you one thing today. Help us to learn to forgive like you. I ask it in Jesus' name.